Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, somewhere in the basement, punished.
I'm a subterranean this week.
Long Island. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, somewhere in the Mediterranean. No, remember that? Broadcasting from somewhere in the Mediterranean.
That was A.B. Natan, right? The voice of peace.
Yes.
The sabbaticalized Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, dedicated to Parsha Talk.
Good Shabbos, everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we start into this amazing Parasha Tetzaveh, I want to just give a shout out to two things that have become really important during the pandemic. One, which just completed a milestone that our viewers and listeners should learn about, is 929.org.il. If you want to study a chapter of the Bible, the Tanakh, every day, go to 929.org.il. Lots of resources in English and in Hebrew, and you can study the entire Bible day by day. Today was chapter 5 of the book of Genesis. Okay, they just did a completion of the Tanakh. Big shout out to 929, and it was a great celebration. It's a very exciting thing. For those people who don't want to do the daily daf, which can be really mind-bending, the chapter of Tanakh a day, I think, is the way to go. That's number one. Number two is we want to just give a big shout out to Safaria, Sefaria.org, which is the entire storehouse of classic Jewish literature online. You can get every single text ever written and look at it, read it, go to commentaries and all the things associated with it. Safaria. And it has become the indispensable, I would say, and I don't know if you want to just talk about it for a second, it's a game changer. It's been a game changer in terms of the way that we present and talk about texts. No doubt, it's revolutionized the way that we teach. Barry?
So what I would say, it's not only a game changer, it's a game changer that keeps changing its game. Yeah. Meaning that it has grown in leaps and bounds from what it was. Not only do they have so much text, they have a lot of translations, and people create worksheets, and they're also part of Safaria as well.
Right.
And it is a task, I think, for Jewish education to figure out how to integrate it, because so many kids, that's where they first go. You tell them to look something up, and they go to Safaria. Books, as we know them, libraries, can't get into the seminary library yet, are something of the past. Most kids today utilize the virtual library, the computer.
I'll tell you something, I mean, even in my life, preparing classes and preparing sermons, I can remember, putting stacks and stacks of books on my desk, looking through commentaries, and there's a certain joy in that. And let's not, underestimate the joy of holding a book and looking at an underlining, etc. But now, I mean, come on, I have an exponential amount of resources just to click through, and it's made teaching just a different kind of joy, I think.
It's totally phenomenal. I'll just throw out another name. There's a website called Al HaTorah, ALHATORAH. Is it .com or .org? It's .org, and I don't know that it's got great English resources for anybody who might be looking for that, but it's got tremendous Hebrew resources. I have my Bar Ilan disk on my computer, and then there's a website which is, all praise to Chabad for this, called HebrewBooks.org.
HebrewBooks.org.
These books are, when books are out of print, in some cases still in print when they shouldn't be doing, but you want to look up you see some reference to some book, and you go to it, and you will get a PDF of the 1814 Krakow edition or something like that. You can't always see them so well because the images are not so clear sometimes, but it's like phenomenal. If you want to just pick up almost any book in the vast majority of the Torah bookshelf of the last several centuries. They're all out there and they're downloadable, and it's totally amazing.
So, it's a good segue to our Parsha, because the Parsha actually is filled with visual and tactile information that we cannot see and we cannot touch. Starting out, with the menorah, or with lighting the menorah, you have to light the menorah with shemen zayit zach, okay, the pure olive oil. But then we go into the whole discussion of bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha. You shall make the clothing, the holy clothing for your brother Aaron, lichavod l'tifar, such an amazing expression to honor and beautify. And in contemporary Israel, that's the formula for the honoring the people with the lighting of the torches, lichvod u'letiferet midinat Yisrael, to honor and to beautify and to glorify. And so the purpose of the clothing was really to take this individual and the whole cohort of Kohanim and to set them apart and to give them the kind of comportment and the bespoke outfits that would make them both beautiful and honored and give honor to their profession and to what they were doing. And the Parsha is quite luscious in its description, all the names of the things. But let's take a second to focus on the Urim ve-Tumim. If we had the pictures, we could throw them up in the video here. But you're going to have to read it and look up the pictures yourselves. Here are the Urim ve-Tumim, and maybe just the sounds of the words. They are actually quite luscious sounding. The different kinds of gems. Here it says, Umileta bo miluat even arba'a turim avem. You will with stones, 4 rows of stone. Tur.
Go like this. You will fill up the filling spaces with stones, 4 rows of stones. The way the Bible loves to repeat these is almost like musical notes.
Yes.
You'll fill the filling with stones of the stones. The odem pita uvareket, whatever the stones are.
Is it vareket or barekas?
It's barekas. Mushroom.
All right. Nofesh, sapir v'yahalom, leshem, shevov achlama, tarshish, v'shom v'yashveh. This elegant style. I mean, where do they get these things? Who knows? But this Urim ve-Tumim is I mean, that's the spectacular symbol of the Koen Gadol. Barry, go ahead.
So there are 2 things that we should add here. First of all, one of the great rabbis of all time, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, was the author of one of the great codes of Jewish law, the Arba'at Turim, which he took from our Parsha. And what's interesting for us, I think, is that the breastplate was one of the great religious symbols of Temple Judaism. It was a way that the priest could discover oracles from God. And for us, that has been transmuted into halakha, that what our ancestors looked to the priests for, we look to books or virtual books, as we were discussing earlier, of Jewish law in order to navigate our life. The other thing, which is somewhat related to this, is that so much of what we've been discussing the last couple of weeks with the tabernacle and the building and the clothes and the furniture was not really seen by too many people. That, the garments of the high priest might only be seen by another priest.
Yeah.
The Mizbeach HaKetoret, which is in the Kodesh, the antechamber, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, could only be seen by a priest who went into it. It was never accessible to Amcha, to the Israelites. And it reminds me, number one, of the medieval cathedrals, where so much of what was built was seen only by the artisan. And then no one ever saw it again. And it's an interesting insight into life. And we spend our time thirsting for knowledge, and it does us well to remember that part of our search has to be respectful of what we can never know and we can never see.
So in a sense, then the Koen Gadol is functioning as an ambassador. Last week we talked about the narrative of the structure, And so, here there's a narrative in the clothing, and what you're saying, and I think it's a great point to highlight, which is that it's a really intimate narrative, that if the Koen Gadol with all his vestments is really not seen beyond a certain zone, right? He's got to change clothing, several times. Yom Kippur, he changes clothing all the time, but you can't go out of the holy area wearing the Urim ve-Tumim. I'm assuming, right? You don't walk around the streets of Jerusalem wearing the Urim ve-Tumim, but you do walk around inside the holy area with the Urim ve-Tumim, and that's an intimate kind of connection. So if the Kohen Gadol is God's ambassador to the people, the Kohen Gadol is also Israel's ambassador to God, and that's playing itself out in the clothing as well, and it's playing itself out specifically on the chest over the heart of the Kohen Gadol. He wears this over the heart, and it's remarkable the way that the text describes this, because it says he places, the Urim ve-Tumim are these gems that are placed like in an envelope of cloth, and the text is very similar. In Venatata, you place the luchot in the box, you place the Urim ve-Tumim in the envelope, and so you have a symmetry. The covenant is in the sacred receptacle of the people, and the people is the closest it can get to the sacred receptacle of the holiest representative of the people. If you could actually open it up and insert them in there, that's what you do. You can't, obviously. He wears it on his heart.
I think the key word that you used earlier is loving, right? There's a lot of loving detail here, and it highlights for us that unlike the other classical leaders of biblical Israel, the king and the prophet, the priest is the leader of love. The prophet and the king are associated with a certain harshness, shall we say? And even though there's a wonderful discussion about how the prophets love Israel, I think most of us would consider their kind of love to be tough love. But the priest in our Parsha and last week and moving forward is described in very loving terms because he represents the God of love. Right. If the priest does everything correctly, the way he has been trained to do, it benefits not only him and all of Israel, but God as well.
Right. I agree with everything you guys have said, and I have one other level of poetic resonance about this, and it's from a different part of the Tanakh altogether, and it's in a sense not a very nice. We may have talked about this last year because when I first learned this, I was blown away by it, and I repeat it every year in some form or another. In Ezekiel chapter 28, there's a kind of an oracle to the king of Tyre, and it's a fallen angel kind of oracle. You were so beautiful, you were so perfect, you lived in the Garden of Eden, but you were thoroughly wise, you were just the apotheosis of humanity, and then you grew prideful and you fell, and so so it seems like a fallen angel or a fallen Adam kind of story. But let me scroll ahead to Ezekiel 28. Listen to this. Oh, you were wiser than Daniel, not Daniel of the Bible, the sort of mythic wise figure. No one can compare to you. Your great shrewdness in trade. You are the most wealthy. You are everything. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and flawless in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God, and every precious stone was your adornment.
There you go.
Odem pita v'yahalom, Tarshish shoham v'yashpeh, sapir nofach uvareket. So this fallen angel, this apotheosis of what a person could be, is wearing almost the exact same clothing that the high priest was wearing. And it doesn't actually say adornment. It says, it says was your covering, misuchatecha. So I think that what is being described here, as in a story by Nachman of Breslov, is a figure whose body is actually all gemstones. And I think the high priest, and that, in this mythic story of Ezekiel, that guy goes down. The high priest, however, in contrast to that, he has that body of human perfection. So I think that one of the ways in which this functions is that, like, who is the high priest? The high priest is just the apex of human perfection.
Sure, sure. You know what I was thinking, and I was trying to make the connection a little stronger, but I didn't have enough evidence. The Garden of Eden here, there is the one kind of Shoham, right? Is mentioned in the
Mhm.
in the Eden story.
Yeah.
It's not hard to imagine that in Eden, in the imaginary place, that it's filled with beautiful things, um, and that part of what the Koen Gadol is doing is he's a portable. I want to say a portable Eden also, and I want to just go. Nobody knows what the equivalents are of both the species of the stones and their meanings. Anybody who tells you is really not is talking nonsense. Um, so on the one hand, that's great because we can all invent meaning to this, and it shows that it's just possible to add layers and layers, which I'm going to do presently, which is to say that minerals and gems are symbols of earth in a very, very unique way, because minerals demonstrate the way that the earth itself co-evolves with life, and that's in science, and that follow the science here. The geology of earth is that mineral species evolve; they co-evolve with life. And so what the high priest in fact is wearing is not only symbols of the people, certainly directly is representing the people to God, but he's also representing something of like the universe, and something also of Gan Eden, and something that's beyond comprehension, and and that's what a symbol has to do. Barry, you came forward. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think the way that you put it very is very nice and very attractive, because when we think of the story of the Garden of Eden, we sometimes forget that that is the entire world at that moment.
Indeed.
There is nothing outside of the Garden of Eden. And what struck me when I was going through the Parsha before we started talking is that the Mishkan represents the cosmos. It is the ordered world, just like the creation story is, whether it's the creation story of chapter 1, the familiar 6 days plus Shabbat at the beginning of chapter 2, or the extended creation story, which begins with the creation of Adam and will carry through with the events that unfold in the next few chapters of Breshit. And then it leaves us with this interesting image of the priest who, I think, with wearing the breastplate, is carrying the people Israel.
Yeah.
He is the shepherd, as it were. He's kind of a Moses figure. We don't often think of the priest as Moses. We identify him with Aaron, but he also here has a kind of divine image as well, because he is carrying the people like God carried the people on the wings of eagles. And it gives us, I think, a certain insight into the way the Mishkan was supposed to function. It was supposed to create order for the people, and lives, as we know from reading the rest of the Bible, was often quite chaotic. You wonder, where they got their rest and their sense of peace in their daily lives. And one place where that could happen would be in the Mishkan or later in the temple.
That is what you just said is, you know, at every level of human experience in 2022 or 2022 BCE, to be a religious person is to sense that even though life is really complicated, disordered, painful, that there's death and sickness, and to feel that there is an order that is beautiful and good, and holding those two things, in your spirit and in your mind, that is what it is to be a religious person. And at different times in history, there, the specific ways people negotiated that change, and the specific things that troubled them or the specific things that reassured them were different than they might be today. But I think that the Mishkan is exactly what you said, and I think religious ritual is exactly what you said, that there is a way that Israel and God meet in covenant in this physical structure that reaffirms that despite all of the chaos out there, it is possible to create a zone of ritual purity and of intellectual purity and goodness and beauty.
Okay,
Very well said.
So let's jump then to that part of the Parsha that gives us really that punchline, and that is chapter 29, verse 43, where it does talk about, after describing what some of the inauguration ceremonies are going to be for the Mishkan, it really gives you a statement of this mission. V'no'adati shama livnei Yisrael. I will meet you. I will be met there to Bnei Israel. V'nikdash b'chvodi. And translate, it will be there will be sanctification in my presence. V'kidashti et ol moed v'hamizbech. I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar. V'et Aaron v'et banav hakadesh techahen li. And I will set them aside to be my Kohanim. And then v'shachanti b'toch Bnei Yisrael vayiti lahem le'Elohim. I will dwell among the people of Israel, and I will be their God. V'yadu ki ani Adonai Elohehem. And they will know that I am their God. Asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took them out of Egypt, le'shochni v'tocham, to have my presence dwell among them. Ani Adonai Elohechem. That, if that's not the punchline, if that's not the theme of this, I don't know what is. And part of this is, let's follow the arc here. So God makes a covenant with Abraham. God promises that they're going to be, have this experience. God delivers on the promise and releases them from bondage. God brings them to the Mount Sinai to reveal God's will. I don't want to say Dayenu, but it would have been enough. But that's not the point. The point is buried. What's the point of the whole Exodus? What's the point of the whole story?
I think there's 2 points, I think. One point is that we get the sense of a transactional God, that God is creating a transaction with the people because God needs us as much as we need him. That God has been in search, to use Heschel's famous phrase, God in search of man. God is looking for someone to be his partner, and he came across the Israelites, or the Hebrews before that, with Abraham, and now us, their descendants. And every step of the way is an opportunity for us to connect with God.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's God saying, like Cheap Trick, I want you to want me. I need you to need me.
Well, I don't think we want to explore the idea of God being a cheap trick.
Okay, never mind. Okay, go ahead. Sorry to be levity. No, but
the other thing I want to say, though, is that this also provides us with another conclusion, right? The Exodus sets something in motion. Sometimes we look at it as an end in itself. We were slaves in Egypt, and suddenly we are free. Sometimes we look to the revelation at Mount Sinai, as the rabbis did, using Shavuot as the bookend to the Pesach story. We celebrate the revelation at Sinai after 50 days after the Exodus. But here, God becomes our God when we build the Mishkan at his direction. Right. And we often lose sight of that fact, that the key here is that the Mishkan is what is required for God to dwell amongst us.
We totally,
the question for us,
because it's
living in the post-temple world, is where is our Mishkan?
Exactly. And so it's interesting, as you're speaking, it's just so abundantly clear. We are so immersed in the story of the Exodus through Pesach. We celebrate that on an annual basis. We don't celebrate the Mishkan on an annual basis. We don't. The best we do is read these parshiot. 5 of them, basically, 2 describing how to make it, 2 describing how it's made, and 1 the crisis in between. And we can't wait to get through them. That's how it's done.
And there's a wonderful irony here, because the date of the revelation is not given in the Torah.
Exactly.
The rabbis created, but the date of the Mishkan being erected is given in the Torah, and I don't remember it offhand. And I venture to say most of us.
Nisan. Is Rosh Chodesh Nisan the one you're on?
Yeah. So it's like happy anniversary Mishkan Day, happy Mishkan Day, National Mishkan You know,
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And I think that we were talking before we started recording that Nachmanides' view is exactly what you just said. That the whole point that they're still actually in exile until they can reach the level of intimacy with God that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had, which happens at the Mishkan. He thinks the whole point. He very vociferously objects to Rashi's view, which is widely held by lots of people, that the Mishkan came after the golden calf. That the Mishkan was like the tikkun for the idolatry of the golden calf. He says, no, this was the whole point. This is the whole point, is to create this space. Now, I wonder, we're schooled in the contemporary, academic study of Judaism. We know that the Bible is a composite book, and this is a priestly kind of story with the detail oriented and the whole focus on the place of worship. And of course, we know that 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people's central shrine got destroyed, and since then we had to do something else. And we have been traveling around the world in exile, and especially those of us who live in America, where the story of actual enslavement and the liberation of those people who were enslaved is so big. It makes kind of sense that if you're an American and you think about the story of African slavery, and if you're a Jew and you've been thinking about all the pogroms and all of the expulsions and the Nazis and then you think that like leaving Egypt is the most important thing. And of course it is a massive thing. But I think for our biblical ancestors, the creation of the worship shrine was probably like really important. And the post-Churban, the post-destruction Judaism wasn't really about that anymore. And it was about the things that you could hold on to, especially the Torah itself and the traditions of learning. So it made, like the meaning of the mitzvot, the meaning of reading of the book, the meaning of Revelation, those things are more important than the building of a shrine.
So in a way, this brings us back to what you said at the beginning, Barry, which is that and I think it's a very important idea that the Mishkan functions on a certain level as a private structure. It's the Koen Gadol is God's personal servant, as it were, and following the end of that, the collapse of all of that, then everybody gets. I mean, we have Kohanim today, and we of course have respected Kohanim today, of course, and they preserve that vestigial honor, but everybody has access to Torah. There has been the process of the destruction, and this was, in a way, Gershon Cohen Zal, right? He said, the blessed
Another Cohen,
right? So he said, that it gave rise to the democratization of Judaism. Everybody has access to it. It's not through the pedigree. It's not through your class. Anybody can reach the Torah. Anybody could reach the Holy of Holies now.
I have to say, there's a great Gershon Cohen story that he was talking once about the golden age of Spain, which most of us look at as one of the great highlights of Jewish history. And his comment was, it was about 8 families.
But they wrote good poetry, so we still read them.
Right. So we have a tendency to make of the past what we will. It doesn't always coincide with the reality of the time that we think we're talking about, but it always has to mean something to us. And I think, what's striking for us is that the Torah, which we study today with such love and passion, is not quite the Torah that our ancestors received at Mount Sinai. And one sometimes wonders what they would make of what we have made of the Torah.
Right. They said it's just a gem. It's just a rock. What are you doing with this? You're making all sorts of fancy schmancy interpretations. Come on. You ever see a pearl? You ever see a? That's what it was. Okay. All right.
But I mean that's everything because our baseline commitment is there's nothing meaningless. Everything is meaningful. You just have to keep digging.
In fact, look, I mean, we could talk about, this is our second round through this. We're almost at 2 years of doing this. We started, I think, at this Parsha, didn't we not? Or
close. It was another month away.
Another month
on the calendar.
So and still, what's so joyful for us is that even seeing it on the 300th time, there are new there are new points, there are new things, there are new things to see, there are new sparkles from the diamond, from the jewels of the Urim ve-Tumim, right? And maybe that's the metaphor here, is that it's never gonna sparkle in the same way at the same time. It's always going to give off a different hue.
My friend and congregant Nicholas Lemon, is, you might know much of his journalism. He writes in the New Yorker and other publications. He had an essay come out recently. He grew up extremely, he was an identified Jew. He grew up in the Reform community in New Orleans, but it was really quite alienated from, traditional practice, and now has, become much more oriented to traditional practice. And he said the main thing for him is the reverence with which communities like ours treat the Torah, from the ritual ways we stand up and kiss it and make fanfare of the reading of it. But he says, I live in these. He just wrote this essay, which I happened to read this week. He says, I live in the worlds of academia and journalism, in which secularity is just the norm, and people just roll their eyes if you're connected to a religious community. But what moves him so much is the way the communities lavish attention on the Torah, read it ritually, read it with ritual fanfare, and keep talking about it because they believe that there is something they can learn from it that they don't already know.
Absolutely.
So this leads us back to the breastplate. So we cannot have the sparkle of the breastplate that our ancestors had, but we can make the breastplate sparkle for us.
Indeed.
And that is what Torah is as well.
Indeed, all the different faces of the panim, the more than shivim panim la Torah, the 70 factorial, whatever, to the nth degree.
Yeah, well, I think there's 70 faces to the Torah, or 49 faces to the Torah, whichever thing. I think the image actually is panim, not like human faces, but facets of a stone.
Absolutely.
And here we are. This is the Parasha of the gemstones.
There you go. Well, that's a great way to end our talk today. And
it was a gem.
It was a gem. We want to thank everyone for being with us, for spending your time with us. We are so happy and thankful to you for doing that. Listening, watching, however you do it, when you're preparing for Shabbos or else any other time. We thank you. Look forward to being with you again. And we want to say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Again on the next edition of Parasha Talk. Bye-bye.